What are motherly Xianyun's biggest pros and cons? That's what I'm here to tell you today. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. One of Xianyun's greatest qualities is that she unlocks an entirely new playstyle. That's right, plunging. Some characters are able to plunge already, such as Xiao, Gaming, and Varessa. However, there are plenty of units who are unable to plunge by themselves. Xianyun's burst provides enough jump height for every character in the game to be able to plunge. This is really cool because it allows characters who would really benefit from having plunges in their rotation to take advantage of the playstyle. For example, this bird lady completely saved Diluc as a character, because before, he had extremely high plunge scalings in his kit, but could never take advantage of them. With this intelligent inventress, he's able to consistently plunge during his rotation, which single-handedly managed to put him back on the map as a good power DPSing option, or even how C0 Hu Tao feels like an absolute stinker to play. With this bird lady around, you're able to incorporate plunges into a rotation, which makes her feel so much better to play down at C0. Now I should mention that Xilonen is still better for the funeral director, even if that means that you have to suffer for C0's clunkiness. However, even if that offers the highest amount of damage, you may find Xianyun-based playstyles to be more comfortable. There's also Plunge Navia teams. Now unfortunately, if you're using her with Xilonen, then you won't be able to use this because the DJ Cat wants 2 non-Geo, Dendro, or Anemo units in her teams. However, if you run a team like Cinder City Kachina, Farina, Xianyun, you're able to make it work quite effectively. Considering how contested the DJ Cat is as a unit, that's a pretty neat way to free her up for the other side. Of course, not every DPS prefers incorporating plunges into their main rotations. However, this lovely bird lady makes it a viable option, therefore making the game more fun as a result, because this is an entirely different way to play the game. A niche use case that I'd like to mention would be using our beloved Lady Farina at C6 of Xianyun. In my personal experience, her plunge teams are easily the most enjoyable, no questions asked. This fine inventress happens to be an extremely strong healer as well. You typically pull her for the whole plunging gimmick. The amazing healing she offers means that she's able to consolidate multiple roles into one. You're completely covered in terms of fanfare generation if you add this bird lady to your team, because she front-loads a crap ton of healing all at once whenever you cast her burst. Not to mention the lovely amount that she offers to your on-field character at all times. She's genuinely one of the best 5 stars in the game when it comes to the healing game. You're gonna find yourself being highly impressed by this quality of hers. Xianyun's also an absolutely fantastic plunge buffer. Yes, that's right. She doesn't only enable the playstyle universally, but she also buffs it up too. This is what makes her really good to use with characters such as Xiao, Gaming, and Varessa. Despite the fact that those characters are already able to plunge themselves, the fact that Xianyun's A4 is able to add damage on means that she ends up being fantastic for Vape Gaming, and a really good choice for Varessa. In Xiao's case, she makes him a whole lot better in single target encounters, because her A4's buff only applies to one enemy at a time. We'll touch on that more a little later, but keep that in mind. This also means that she excels as a team support in boss-based encounters, which considering how single target-centric the Abyss tends to be most of the time, that's quite relevant. Yes, we have been getting some more AoE Abysses recently, but I consider those to be the exception, not the norm. Generally speaking, the Abyss is a very single target game mode, so you'll usually be able to comfortably fully take advantage of Xianyun's A4 more often than not. You'll be able to use her on 4P Song of Days Past 2 for some additional buffing. That offers some damage dealt increase to your main DPS, which is huge. That'll be especially relevant for Xiao teams, where 4VV won't be as effective. However, that's another avenue that you can take, using 4VV on her for the sake of swirling, but do keep in mind that uptimes can be a little awkward there. Nevertheless, it'll still be a viable avenue to take. Also, because Varessa is coming out soon, she's going to be gaining a brand new really strong synergy. She's gonna become the new best Electro DPS in the game if we focus on things solely in terms of damage numbers. And while you'd prefer to play her in an overload team using Moika as a sub DPS, her Xianyun teams are still absolutely worthwhile. She'll be able to buff up the Cow's fiery passion plunges to an excellent extent. I definitely don't want to move on without mentioning how strong her C2 is either. Doubling her already great A4 effect is a really solid form of high Primogem based investment for all of your plunge DPSs. I wouldn't recommend it over something like Xilonen C2 or Lady Farina C2, but it's still a really high value C2 to go for if it absolutely gets you what you pay for. Another niche note. C2 Xianyun's an excellent form of further high Primogem based investment for C6 Farina mains, because Plunge Vape is an incredibly strong team for our dearest Hydro Archon when she's at max copies. Oh, but I would like to point out that unless you're gonna C6 her, I would stop at C2. Her C3 to 5 are genuinely useless, with her C4 just being kinda redundant. I should also mention how this character is quite generally versatile. What I mean by this is that you don't have to use her for plunge buffing or plunge-based qualities. If you want to use her simply for her healing as a gene replacement, then yes, you can do so. And because she's an Anemo, you're able to use her as a universal 4VV unit. She doesn't have grouping, but that's fine in Xiao's case because that guy's already an AoE DPS. As for the others, they're already more single target-centric units. That does gimp her a bit in Abysses that have a surprising amount of AoE, but there will still be chambers of mostly single-target encounters for her to excel in. Besides, if you're using her as a general unit and not for plunging specifically, then the single-target nature of her buff is irrelevant, because you're only using her for her other capabilities. So you get quite a versatile character on the whole when you pull for Xianyun. Granted, this pro of hers is greatly diminished if you're more of an established player that has lost to quite a few copies of Jean over time. That unit is able to fulfill the same generalist Anemo healer role, but on the other hand, this means that if you don't already own Jean, then Xianyun's value totally skyrockets. So this next point isn't strictly meta-related, but I felt the need to include it. Xianyun has been on my main Genshin team since day one of her release, and for good reason. She is absurdly comfortable in the overworld. The pleasure that this character brings in terms of exploration is second to none. I would honestly argue that she's better for exploring than most of the Notlon units, because her quality of life isn't region locked. Her skill hops are a fantastic method of fast travel that I 100% take advantage of every single time that I play this game. It's ridiculously good. Granted, I have C2, and C1 gives her an extra charge on her skill, so take that with a grain of salt. However, even down at C0, her exploration comfortability is certainly still there. As excellent as this intelligent inventress is, we should certainly go over her key flaws. For starters, like I mentioned earlier, her A4's buffs only applies to one enemy at a time. This can be annoying in 2 to 3 target scenarios, which are actually fairly common in endgame situations. For a character like Xiao as an example who can hit many enemies around him at the same time, this proves to be quite an annoyance. It ends up resulting in a situation where you'd rather use Bennett for AoE situations because his attack buff will allow your DPS to hit all enemies with an increased amount of damage, not just one at a time. This isn't too off-putting in boss-based scenarios, but in situations where there's more than one target, you're gonna start to feel the effects more. If you get your Bird Lady up to C2, then you'll do enough damage to the point where it won't matter anymore, and it'll even itself out. But down at C0 to 1, you're not really gonna want to use her in situations where there's 4+ beefy enemies that spawn on the same wave. If it's 2 to 3, then it's manageable, but any more than that, you're gonna start to feel the consequences. Another negative is that since Hoyoverse took so long to rerun this character, she's been overtaken in her absence. The release of the DJ cast has made her better in numerous teams where Xianyun used to be a top dog, or top bird would be more fitting in this case, I suppose. For instance, Navia is an extremely high value synergy to have, because she's currently an amazing DPS. Before Xilonen came out, Xianyun was a part of her previous Best as All team, but when the DJ cat rolled around, unfortunately she kicked the bird out of her nest. To be honest, even though Xilonen is better in C0 Hu Tao teams, I think 99% of players would rather take the more comfortable option of playing the bird inventress because it reduces clunk issues so much. However, because it's relevant, I do want to point out that the DJ cat beats Xianyun here these days. You see, she's able to shred Hydro and Pyro Res, which is a big deal. No previous teammate has been able to do that for her before, as 4VV users could only ever consistently swirl Hydro in a Hu Tao double Hydro team. Zhongli did have a universal 20% res shred, but he was generally weaker when using a 4VV option such as Kazuha, and then Xianyun came along to completely diff everyone because of how she reduced C0 clunk so much. Not to mention how the recent addition of Lady Farina to Hu Tao teams, because the Hydro Arcana came out in 4.2 with the Bird Inventress being released in 4.4 2 patches later, meant that having a healer in the team was now worth it for the funeral director, whereas previously, that was never worth it. Lady Farina's damage bonus percent buffs made up for the loss of Hu Tao's inbuilt pyro percent and then some, which is why that ended up being the case. But Xilonen was able to provide good enough healing, and then increase the personal damage of Hu Tao herself in a double Hydro team. This isn't even mentioning 4P Cinder City, which ended up being another huge boon to the team. Xianyun just can't compete with all of that on paper. In practice, however, depends on how willing you are to go through C0 suffering. Though if you get C1 Hu Tao, the gap between them increases even more. So there's much less of a hunger for an account to own a Xianyun these days. I will say that for a Diluc main, she's 1000% still worthwhile, and I'd say that she still remains as an excellent pickup for Xiao mains, not to mention how Varese is breathing new life into the Bird Inventress's pull value. Yet with that being said, no need to get Xianyun in particular. We're also simply spoiled for choice when it comes to Anemo supports. Xilonen and 4P Cinder City Kachina have negated the absolute need for them these days, but we still have a crud ton of them to choose from. Kazuha remains as a meta staple, being an S-tier character even to this day. If you have him in the DJ Cat, there's not really any reason to pick up Xianyun in particular, unless you need it for a specific character such as Diluc. Other Anemos are able to get the job done just fine too. If it's simply good healing that you want, Jean is right there. Even if you only have her down at C0, she'll do quite literally everything that you'd want her to do that isn't Plunge related, while also hosting other unique qualities such as Sunfire Bennett synergies. Xianyun is very Plunge specific. If that's what you want, then great. She's perfect for that job. Otherwise, you don't really need her. Xilonen's rerun is popping up in the second half of this patch. While I do think that this lovely bird lady is a fantastic pull, and adore her as she's actually one of my top 5 favorite Genshin characters of all time, I can't recommend getting her over the DJ Cat first, unless you're a Diluc or Ga Ming main, as she benefits those two characters to an absurd extent, but Xiao and future Veressa mains have viable alternatives. She's amazing at what she does, and I have a much easier time recommending her if you already have all of the meta staples, such as Lady Farina, Kazuha, and Xilonen, because while she's not a priority pull, she's still an excellent addition to any Genshin account in my opinion, not to mention how convenient she is to explore with, and our constellations up to C2 are very good. A good pull for sure, just make sure that you assess how necessary she is for you first. What do you think about Xianyun? Are you pulling for her now that she's back? Let me know down below, I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, I have a ZZZ second channel. Head on over and subscribe if you're interested in some fun, silly ZZZ content. I swear I will upload on there soon. I promise you. It's been a while. I've been busy, but I will, I promise. I'd also like to mention that I stream on Twitch. I stream once a week every week on Saturday, starting from 3 PM UK time. Come along so we can play Wuthering Waves, ZZZ, and do some other fun stuff together. Hopefully this video is able to tell you Xianyun's biggest pros and cons. This has been Juice, signing out, and Xianyun, Shenhe, and Ganyu are the peakest trio in all of Genshin. Change my mind.